everyone, and welcome back to Simply Renee. My name is Renee. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has liked, shared, commented, and subscribed to my channel. I truly appreciate it as it helps me to grow, and for also clicking the notification bell and watching my videos. For this video, I wanted to participate in Jane Austen July by talking about my 10 favorite Jane Austen adaptations. For those of you unfamiliar with Jane Austen, she's a talented writer from the early 19th century whose 6 novels have stood the test of time. She wrote several famous novels such as Pride and Prejudice and Emma, but she's also written great works such as Mansfield Park, Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, and Northanger Abbey, and her books are still being highly discussed. She finds fans even now, more than 200 years after her passing in 1817, and there's been various adaptations for screen and stage. And for me to participate in Jane Austen July this year, I wanted to talk more about her adaptations than anything else. If you are curious to know my opinions about her books, I do have a ranking system video that I made last year to celebrate Austen's 250th birthday, and I'll leave a link in the description. For Jane Austen July, where it's a time for us to really think about Jane Austen and participate by reading her books, looking at her adaptations, and more, I decided to do more about the adaptations, and I wanted to do the 10 ones that are my favorite and the ones that I will always watch no matter what. And we're also getting 2 new adaptations of Jane Austen's work this year, Pride and Prejudice, and the other is going to be of her book Sense and Sensibility. And these are just the adaptations that I love the most. Now, I won't be including ones I haven't seen yet, therefore such adaptations as Love and Friendship and Sanditon will not be included in this one, and I'll also be revealing plot details, therefore spoilers are ahead. The first one I will be talking about is the 2009 miniseries Emma, based off of Jane Austen's work of the same name. Now, this is a story about a young woman named Emma Woodhouse who came from a wealthy type of household. She had little to stress her completely about finances, and she lived a relatively good life in her town of Highbury. And she's a person that can be very divisive in the fandom because sometimes she's a little standoffish, a little snobby. She thinks she knows better than everyone else. And because she's had this kind of ego about her, about being this beautiful and clever young lady who has everything she could ever want in the wealth and luxury, and she's had little to trouble her about that, it does give her a little bit of an ego. But what's made her ego a little bit bigger is the fact that she has now taken a turn to matchmaking. She's had successful matches of her former governess as well as her sister, so she thinks that she's able to match anybody completely with each other, even though she doesn't realize that sometimes what she perceives as affection may not be completely that way. Sometimes she gets the wrong impressions, and otherwise doesn't really know that sometimes she can make a mistake that can be detrimental to someone's life. Even though Emma herself is a divisive character in the fandom, I personally like her as well as the book because I feel she's the most developed of Jane Austen's heroines. She's the one that grows the most and evolves because over the course of the year of this novel, she realizes she doesn't really know too much about life as well as her own heart and her own perceptions and her impressions, and she has to really learn and grow from that. And that's what I like most about it, is that she gets character development, she truly evolves and even finds love herself. But for me, the 2009 miniseries is one I like the most, and the reason for that is simply because it has a way of really fleshing out the entire book as much as possible within a 4-part miniseries where it's an hour-long episodes. And I really like that because when I watch the film versions of Emma, they do get to where it needs to go within the short amount of time they have, and there have been some good adaptations of film versions. I like the one with Gwyneth Paltrow in 1996, and I even like the one in 2020. But I really do think the miniseries is the best version for me, just because I think it allows all the book to be fleshed out in those episodes. It has also beautiful costumes and scenery. I think the cast choices were great. In fact, Romola Garai, who plays Emma, really brings a certain level of warmth to Emma that I enjoy to make her feel like a little bit more of a flawed individual rather than someone who drives you a little crazy because of that. So I do think the 2009 version miniseries is great. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it because I think it is just a great adaptation of the book. Speaking of Emma, the next one I'm going to talk about is the 2013 web series titled Emma Improved. Now, Emma Improved is a more modern adaptation of the Jane Austen novel Emma, which takes place, of course, in the modern world and is part of a production company that was called Pemberley Digital, where they brought more modern adaptations of classic books back in the early 2010s. And this version, you find Emma, who is starting her own company with lifestyle, wedding planning, events, and more. And her partner in the business is Knightley, who is now a little bit more of a business sense here. And they have a good rapport, as they do in the book, as well as the 2009 miniseries and the other screen adaptations. But in Emma Improved, they bring a good job of a more modern take, where Emma still has to develop, grow, and evolve herself. She's still finding she's making some mistakes along the way, but it also frames it as someone who's flawed but is learning from her mistakes, and sometimes she's and is framed as having good intentions, especially when Miss Taylor, who is not the governess but a friend of Emma's, is reconsidering her marriage, and Emma tries to figure out a way to keep the marriage going because she believes they truly are a good match, and if they don't get together and have this, then she's going to end up regretting it, Miss Taylor. And so this goes about in great episodic forms, of over 50 of them. It's a wonderful modern adaptation. I like the growth, and we even have some more growth from Harriet, who was in the book a little bit passive and a little bit naive, but here they flesh it out a little bit more as someone who has all that in her, but she does grow and develop and evolve, even becoming a little bit more focused on the business and having a career trajectory in the company that Emma runs. So there is a lot of success that goes on in there, and there's a little bit of twists and turns sometimes too. But it's really good modern adaptation. I truly enjoy it. I think the cast that was part of this was very good. So it's something that I do recommend if you're curious to see a modern adaptation of Emma that's not 1995's Clueless, which is great in its own way. But for me, I just prefer the more modern adaptation of the 2013 Emma Approved. The next one I will talk about is a Mansfield Park adaptation. And for me, Mansfield Park is a hard one to pick an adaptation from because there's been very few of them. It's not the most popular of Jane Austen's works. So basically, it's about a young woman named Fanny who, at the age of 10, was sent off to live with her more wealthier cousins, the Bertrams, who look down on her because she's poor, she's not of wealth, and they see her as inferior. But because her family is hit by hard financial times, they send Fanny off to live with the Bertrams in hopes that she can be well taken care of and evolve and grow more in a environment that can really help her have greater opportunities. But when it comes to this book itself, it's a very hard one to like because even though it is a well-written one, I just have a hard time really relating to the characters as well as the story, even though it has some interesting segments in it. For me, if I were to choose a Mansfield Park adaptation, I would pick the one that's the 1983 miniseries. And the reason for that is because even though it's not the best acted, mainly because I think the acting at that time in 1983, especially for TV, was still very new. So you feel some outdated types of movements and facial expressions and dialogue a little bit. But this is one that I enjoy because it does flesh out the book. So if you are someone that does like Mansfield Park or appreciates some of the things in Mansfield Park, this is the one that I would really recommend because it does flesh out that book. It's a more faithful adaptation to the one, and it does have some nice scenery to it, which I like, and I do think it does have a little bit more development of the characters in terms of what they experience in the novel adapted for screen, and I do think it is an overall good adaptation in that regard if you are a fan of Mansfield Park or you have an appreciation for it. The next one I'll talk about is an adaptation of Persuasion. Now, Persuasion is Jane Austen's final novel and is considered the one that has the most mature heroine in Anne Elliot. And Anne Elliot is a young woman who came from wealthy society, and she's now 27 years old, unmarried, which in Regency era is considered to be an old maid. She doesn't feel that she's going to be able to find someone now because she is 27, and that's not considered marriageable. But for Anne, the biggest regret she has is that 8 years prior, she was engaged to the love of her life, a man named Frederick Wentworth, who was rising up in sailing and the British Navy. But because he wasn't from a wealthy background and didn't have a lot of status to him, she was persuaded to break off the engagement even though she didn't want to, because she wanted to honor her family and respect her family and their wishes. As a result, Anne always had regrets about the engagement being called off and being persuaded to end this engagement. And now, 8 years later, she's 27, unmarried, and she's watching as her family falls into financial ruin and how these struggles they're having with it because they're frivolous spendthrifts. And Frederick Wentworth comes back into her life, only this time he's a wealthy man, having risen in the Navy as a captain. And they end up reconnecting in some ways, but having to realize some things can't really be forgiven. And so it goes into a little bit of growth for Anne and her own realizations about things. And that's what I like best about her, is that she's a more mature heroine in that regard. But when it comes to a Persuasion adaptation, I prefer the 1995 film the best. And the reason for that is because I think it's the most fleshed out one in a lot of ways, because I think it just works well with camera movements, scenery, facial expressions from the lead actors who play Anne and Frederick. It's very well done. There's some nice music to it. And it's just a well filmed one. I do think there's great chemistry between the leads. I think it's a very well done adaptation. And out of all the adaptations I can see, whether that's the Sally Hawkins version in 2007 or even the miniseries version from the 1970s, I do think the 1995 film is the best one that you can watch for this adaptation of Persuasion. The next one is an adaptation of Northanger Abbey. And this is a book that was written and published a little bit more towards the end of Jane Austen's life. And it's a more unusual one from her works because I feel it's more on a lighthearted scale, even though it has some dark themes to it in several regards. And it's a little bit more of a what I consider to be a shorter end novel. But I do enjoy it in some ways because it does have a little bit more of what I think is lightheartedness. And it's all about a young woman named Catherine Morland who is a young, impressionable person, but still very good natured. And she's invited to Bath where she can learn a little bit more about social etiquette, meet new acquaintances and such. And she really enjoys her time there and even gets along very well with a man named Henry Tilney and his family. And she forms relationships and new friendships, even a little bit of romance. But because she has lived a sort of sheltered life and has become interested in Gothic novels and having all those fantasies about it, she sometimes ends up misreading a lot of things. And when she comes to the grand manor of Northanger Abbey, she ends up realizing that reality and fantasy are very different things. And when it comes to Northanger Abbey, it's a novel that has not been adapted very much. I think it's only had about 2 adaptations. And the one that I would choose that is the best is the 2007 version. Nothing wrong with the 1987 version, but I do think the 2007 version is better in some ways. I think it has a very good cast where there is good chemistry between J.J. Field and Felicity Jones, who play Catherine and Henry. And there's also Carey Mulligan in it, just before she was starting to rise up in her career a little bit along the way. And I think it's just a very good adaptation. It has beautiful scenery, it works very well. It's also helped to make starring turns of Felicity Jones and J.J. Field on a bit grander scale. But I just overall like it the best. I think it works well. It has some funny moments. It has some comedy. And it really just works very well. So I think if you're going to watch any Northanger Abbey adaptation, this is the one for you. Next 2 adaptations I'll talk about are based off the book Sense and Sensibility, and this was Jane Austen's first published work about 2 sisters who are finding themselves in different types of financial means. Now, Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, along with their younger sister and mother, lived a relatively grand life. Their father was a wealthy man, and therefore they were able to be provided for quite financially well, but because he passes away and all the wealth and house go to his next male relative, which is an older son from his first marriage, it ends up going all to him, and the son ends up not really helping them out like he was according to the father's wishes. And as a result, everyone has to figure out, how do we live within our means of the inheritance we're getting? And so they find different ways to do it. Eleanor is a little bit more of the pragmatic one, so she ends up being the guiding force for her family to figure out where they need to go and living on a budget, keeping within their means, whereas Marianne is the more impulsive romantic who tries to look on the brighter side of things. And so these 2 sisters are coming of age as teenagers to really figure out life and where they go from here. They meet new people along the way, and they even attract some men who know they aren't really financially sound and don't have an expensive type dowry to give, but they nonetheless are attracted to them and interested in them romantically. So there's a lot of coming of age that does come up here, along with twists and turns. Now, the first adaptation I'll talk about based off this book is the 1995 film, which starred Emma Thompson, Kate Winslet, Alan Rickman, and Hugh Grant. And this is a great adaptation. It works well, flows well. It's got great dialogue, good chemistry between the cast. The crew is great. It was actually directed by Ang Lee, who hadn't been familiar with Jane Austen's works from what I read, but because he recognized the humor in the script, he felt he could really direct it in a great way and truly does. He does a phenomenal job directing this, but it also has great scenery, costumes, and music as well to turn it into a spectacular film from the 1990s. This is an overall good adaptation that's also well acted, well done. You can really sense everything coming out of the characters by just the actors' facial expressions, dialogue, and the tone of the entire film. So it works very well and one that I would recommend. The next adaptation is the 2008 miniseries. Now, this is one that some people like, some people don't, from what I've seen online, but I overall like it, and it was written and directed by Andrew Davies, who did the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice. But what I really liked about this one is that it did provide a little bit more fleshed out of the novel itself. Now, typical films are not going to be able to do it as much as miniseries. Films, they can only do it in 2 hours or less, maybe a little more. Whereas miniseries, depending on the number of episodes, they can get 1 to 4 or even more, and they can flesh out the entire book if they can. And this one really did work. I think the cast was very good. I think the acting was nice. The tone was great. I like the more darker elements implemented in there within the scenery to really give it that more darker, dramatic feel, and some of the more harder ones that you have to talk about in the book, such as Marianne falling ill and not sure if she'll be able to recover. So I do think this is a very good adaptation. So if you're someone that really likes miniseries and really wants to see the whole book fleshed out, this is one that I do recommend. I think it does very well. You have Dominic Cooper in it, and you also have some other great actors too. The next three adaptations I'll discuss are based off Pride and Prejudice. And this is the one that has stood the test of time. It's Jane Austen's most famous novel. It's the one that is continually discussed, talked about, and has the biggest fandom entirely within the Jane Austen universe, and for good reason, because the story is great, the plot is great, the lines and dialogue and comedy, including the characters, are great, but it also has a great love story that still remains a classic trope in romantic novels, as well as films and stage and TV. And that's because it's an enemies to lovers where people make the wrong impressions about each other, don't get along at first, but have the potential to really become a great romance as they either get to know each other and connect, or learn more about each other that they didn't before, to realize, oh, maybe they weren't so bad after all. And this is the book that really is considered the one that gave that trope a name and continues to be used completely, even more than 200 years after its publication in 1813. But basically, what this book is about is that Lizzie Bennet is one of 5 daughters who is someone that has to figure out how she's going to end up getting married to a person of financial means, because unfortunately, the Bennet family is realizing, hey, there's only 5 daughters in the Regency era where they're not going to inherit the house and the wealth, that when their father passes away, it's going to go to the next male relative, which is a man named Mr. Collins, who's quite ridiculous in a lot of different ways. He's an interesting character in his own way. So the daughters have to figure out what they have to do from here, and their mother, who is genuinely concerned for their daughter's financial future, ends up being a little bit more pushier than normal and trying to get them to find men of financial means. And they end up finding 2 suitable ones in Charles Bingley, who's just moved into their area, as well as his friend, Mr. Darcy. And Mr. Bingley is great. He's very fun, polite, friendly, amiable, gets along well with Lizzie's older sister, Jane. They're a nice match. But Mr. Darcy is a very arrogant man, put off. He doesn't really have a lot of social skills or anything like that. And sometimes he has a bit of a sense of inferiority that turns people off. And that's what makes him and Lizzie have a lot of conflict with each other in the beginning. But as time goes on and they get to know each other a little bit, some things happen where they connect or fall apart, or some other things go on where they get the wrong impression of each other and have to literally grow in different types of ways. And that's what makes the novel a very interesting one, and why it's so great for adaptations on screen, stage, TV, anywhere you can. But the one I'll talk about first, though, is the 2012 web series Lizzie Bennet Diaries. And this is a more modern adaptation based off Digital Pemberley, where they did Emma Approved, of course, but they also did Lizzie Bennet Diaries, is weirdly where they had the highest ratings and views and where it really started that company off in the early 2010s. But Lizzie Bennet Diaries is a more modern adaptation of the book in itself, where in this case, Lizzie Bennet is a graduate student in mass communications and doing her thesis project by having daily diaries sent to the masses on video platforms. And she has two other sisters. She has one named Lydia, who is a little bit frivolous, like in the novel, but she's fleshed out a little bit more in different ways throughout the series, which I liked. And she has an older sister named Jane, who's still very much like the Jane in the book, who's very sweet and kind, but is trying to really grow in her industry and struggling with that in a lot of different ways. And the three sisters are really trying to navigate the waters. They have a friend named Charlotte Lou who lives next to them, and she's based off the character Charlotte Lucas, only this time they reimagined Charlotte Lou as a student who's graduated but struggling to find a job and work. So it goes off into these different, more fleshed out modern ways completely. We eventually meet some of the men that come up here, such as Bingley and Darcy and Collins, and we even meet Wickham, who is the evil one in this entire adaptation, as well as in the novel itself. And it really just goes into a more great modern adaptation as they keep the original themes of the novel where first impressions get wrong, you have some twists and turns, but you also have that growth and those realizations about each other. So it sticks very much with the original novel in that way. But they do a good job of bringing a more modern adaptation to do it. And I think it works very well to really give these women more fleshed out characters for the modern sense as they grow in their careers. They have some personal growth, they learn from each other and they evolve. And they also have it with all the men as well. So I do think it's a very good modern adaptation if you're looking for something like that. The next one is the 2005 film version of Pride and Prejudice. Now, in the fandom, there's a lot of back and forth about which version is the best one between 2005 film and the 1995 miniseries. For me, it's the 1995 miniseries. I just love it a lot more, but I also love the 2005 film. And if I'm interested in watching a film adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and I don't have a lot of time on my hands, the 2005 film is the one I go to. And if I have more time on the hands, I'll watch the 1995 version, maybe the 1980 version if I'm up for it. Now, when it comes to the 2005 film, there's a lot of things I love about it. I think the cast and crew have done a great job. It's got beautiful cinematography, wonderful musical score. It just works very well. And it also has a talented cast to really portray these characters. You have Donald Sutherland playing Mr. Bennet, and it works very well. But you also have Keira Knightley bringing more of that spirit to Lizzie in a different way for a more modern touch in 2005. I think Matthew McFadden did a very good job playing Darcy, and I think it does have a lot of great elements to it. Now, there are some things I do criticize, such as Darcy's confession to Lizzie and his proposal to her the first time around, where it does get the tone of the anger and the tension between them correctly, but it does kind of show how they almost kiss at that point, which a lot of people don't like, including me, because at that point in time, Lizzie hasn't come around to Darcy and really gotten to know them. So I think they did adaptations that were better with that. But I understand that they tried to do something different there, which I always think is a good thing. But this is one that I think just was a misguidance on Joe Wright's part as well as the script. But overall, I do think it is a great adaptation. It's very fun, with great cinematography, wonderful music score. I think the cast does a great job. I think Joe Wright did an excellent job directing, and it works very well. So if you're looking for a Pride and Prejudice adaptation that is based off the novel but has to be in a more shortened way because it's a little over 2 hours, this is the one for you. And last but not least is the 1995 Pride and Prejudice miniseries. So this is the one that I love the most of a Pride and Prejudice adaptation because it works very well with a 6-part, 1-hour episodes where you get to have the whole novel fleshed out in the way that you need to. It was written and directed by Andrew Davies, which I think is great. And it's just a wonderful miniseries adaptation. So this is the one that I like the most because I think the cast and crew have done a great job. You have Colin Firth playing Mr. Darcy, and he really does well to capture everything about Darcy, his arrogance, his inferiority, as well as the more sweeter, softer moments that you find out later in the miniseries that show a little bit more of truly who Darcy is at heart. You have Jennifer Eel playing Lizzie Bennet, who works very well with her. They have great chemistry. They even formed a relationship during this. It didn't work out, but because the chemistry was so great and they got along so well, they ended up really beginning to date and have a relationship, even though it was for a brief time. But everything about it is great, and the acting is wonderful. The scenery, the costumes, the musical score, everything about it is just great and wonderful. And if I could be here forever, I would tell so much about this miniseries, but I just think it's wonderful. I think it is the best version of Pride and Prejudice adaptations that you can find that still stand the test of time and still stick out in my mind even 31 years later after it's been filmed for TV and produced and aired on TV. So I think it is just a great adaptation. It works well, flows well. I like how Davies added some things in here that really make the characters a little bit more fleshed out. Like when Darcy is writing a letter to Lizzie about his recollections on why he doesn't like Wickham and how she's wrong to assume these things about him betraying Wickham and really dishonoring him in so many ways. And he writes a letter saying that's not true. And that letter also shows the flashbacks of what he perceived, how they had a great friendship and were very loved and respected each other a lot, but how Wickham's character just went downhill when they were older and what exactly happened there through those flashbacks. I thought that was a nice touch to it to really capture it, especially as Lizzie reads this letter too. So I think that was a great addition that still sticks out in my mind and really works well. And this concludes my 10 favorite Jane Austen adaptations. I thank you so much for staying with me through that video. I realized it was a little choppy in some places. Unfortunately, I'm still battling a little bit of congestion in the nose because of some allergies. But I thank you so much for tuning in. Now tell me what you think. Do you agree with me, not agree with me? Is there one particular adaptation you like over another? Are there other adaptations you can recommend? Please do so in the comments, including your opinions about Love and Friendship and Sandition, as I'm going to be watching those in the near future. I thank you again so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the notification bell. I'll be back on Friday with a food video, Sunday with a Sunday Reads video, and Wednesday with another video. I'll also be putting out some shorts. And I thank you again so much for tuning in. Bye.